like just Kylie's not joining us yet. So, right, thank you for doing the quiz and well done. I see lots of you got in there and did the quiz. And if you didn't manage to get in there yet, you can do it at some point. And hopefully that was just a nice little reinforcement of some of the discussion that we'd had in the last session. And we covered a lot, didn't we? We really sort of whipped through there at the end at that sort of broad brush overview of sort of the safe system and the philosophy and the elements and the way we think about road safety. So as I get my slides up, I'll see if did anybody want to make a comment about anything they'd thought about from the last session, anything they had questions on, anything maybe that I said and they went, oh, I don't know if I believe that, or I've heard something else. Always happy to have that. So I'm going to get my slides up and running, but do unmute yourself and let me know. Everybody's happy there. All right. Well, there's my Borat meme that I was sending to somebody else. Oh, good fun. All right. Well, do as we exactly as we did last time. Please pop your questions into the chat as we go, or unmute yourself. We've got a small enough group that we can just chat. And I'm going to cover off a few more things around the road environment, the infrastructure, and that connection with speed. We'll do a little bit more discussion around some of the behavioural characteristics, a little bit of vehicle stuff as well, but we're really sort of honing in now on infrastructure and why things might be built, how they're built, what some of the purposes are, what some of the, I suppose, failings of the existing infrastructure that we have out there. And by infrastructure, I mean anything that's physical out there, be it either the road itself or the curbing or the traffic signals, or what we would call road furniture. Road furniture are barriers or signs or anything like that. So I'm going to have a good chat about that. Now, fairly early on into this, I'm going to get you to do a little bit of engineering work of the road environment. So you get to put your engineering hat on and pretend to be engineers and come up with redesigns of an intersection. And certainly not expecting you to have good engineering knowledge, but what I'm really looking for is sort of the application of the principles. And often people who aren't constrained by 20 or 30 years of engineering practices come up with some really nice ideas. And it's actually something that we need to have more of, more people sort of coming in fresh from a principles perspective and not constrained by our long-term ways of operating. But as I say, pop your questions in and we'll go from there, and I'll give away a few prizes, of course, hopefully. So where are we at? Module 2. Okay, this one, we're going to delve a little bit more into those kinetic energy thresholds that we talked about. So that's that physical force that humans can take in different crash types before we brake, and we'll hone into that at intersections. We'll look at characteristics of intersections that align highly with safe system principles, and I suppose by default we'll look at what doesn't align safely, and characteristics of mid-blocks that align highly with safe system principles or don't. Now, what I mean by mid-blocks, that's a term we would use in sort of the engineering of a road environment. It is anything between intersections. It's mid-block. Now, don't forget to count your wallies, of course, and you would have seen that as one of your questions. All right, here's a little first chance for a prize. There's an international formula for risk. Does anybody want to have a guess at that? Risk equals something and something else. Anybody want to have a guess at it? Type it in. No marks off if you get it wrong, but just chance to win prizes if you get it right. Oh, okay, Carly, you get half a prize there. You've got likelihood times something. Oh, you're on mute there. What were you going to say? No, it's all right. Oh yeah, and Craig's come in and help. So if we're giving out socks as prizes, you can have a sock each. Then I think is the answer. So I will give you a prize. So it's likelihood times consequence is the sort of international definition of risk. Now, this is not just like road safety risk. This is it. This is risk. This is financial risk, health risk, environmental risk. Like this is risk, and it's really boiled down to this idea that what is the chance a bad thing is going to happen, and then when it does happen, what's the magnitude of badness of that thing? So, like, if you take economic risk, what is the chance that we will the economy will go bad, and then how bad is it going to go? Or environmental, what is the chance of contamination of the Derwent River, and how bad is that contamination going to be? That's the risk of contamination. So this is across the board, and we use it in road safety, and we've used it for a long time. What is the chance a crash is going to happen, and then how bad is that crash going to be? What we've done in recent times is taken it from that likelihood, and we've sort of extrapolated out two elements there, because in road safety we've sort of identified the risk likelihood times consequence works quite well sometimes at isolated spots. But if you're trying to manage a whole network, you want to be a little bit more refined in how you come up with that likelihood. So exposure was embedded into likelihood before. I don't know why I got those extra little lines in there. It doesn't matter. So likelihood always included exposure, but now it's sort of separated out as a couple of elements within a safe system assessment. And it's actually filtering into quite a few other things in road safety. But it's basically, what I mean by exposure is really just how many people are exposed to that crash type. So, how many are driving through that intersection? How many are walking across the road there? How many are riding through? All right, and it's just the pure numbers of people exposed to that potential issue. The likelihood then comes down to the characteristics of the road environment, the speeds of vehicles, the alertness or not alertness of drivers and pedestrians, and those sorts of things at that sort of individual level. The consequence is how bad are things going to be now? And what we do sort of in looking at especially infrastructure and how well it aligns with safe system principles is to sort of analyze each of these and say, how many people are exposed to crashes here? And what's the chance that a crash is going to happen? And when it does happen, how bad is it going to be? And we actually multiply these out. So if, for example, you have an area that has absolutely no pedestrians, right? There's no exposure. But we don't really care about the likelihood of crashes or the severity of crashes because there are no pedestrians there, pedestrian crashes, that is. And if you could hand on heart be saying there is no chance a crash will happen. Now, we really don't ever say that because humans being humans and mistakes, and we're always concerned a crash could happen. But if you were certain a crash was not going to happen, you don't actually care about the exposure to the crash or the severity of the crash because there are no crashes. There are no crashes. And they, like aviation, for example, has taken that approach. They're like, we will eliminate that likelihood because they cannot accommodate the consequence. The speeds, the energy, the physics just does not allow that. So they've just gone straight into that likelihood for the majority of their travel. They do take consequence into account in a bit of taxing and the way we, seat belts and turbulence and things. But in your big sort of catastrophic event, they're not managing energy. It's they got to stop that likelihood. And in a safe system, also like the consequence, if we can say when the crashes happen, nobody is going to be killed or seriously injured because they're slow, the energy's down, or they hit a barrier and they slide along it. We don't actually care about the number of people exposed to it and the likelihood of it happening, because when they happen, nobody's going to be killed or seriously injured. Now, of course, in practical reality and projects and things like that, if we have high exposure, high likelihood of, but low or no consequence in terms of death or serious injury, we're going to want to do something about it, because you're going to have a whole lot of fender benders and minor scrapes and bumps and things like that. It's just not good for transport and people moving around and their lives. But, from a pure safe system perspective, we're getting the result we want, which is nobody killed or seriously injured. So really, these are pretty important elements when we think about the safe system and the management of risk on our transport network. And your assignment that I'm going to get you to do between hopefully now and our last session is to have a little look at a bit of the road network near you. It could be, well, actually, it doesn't have to be near you. Any bit of road network. I'm going to ask you to find an intersection, have a look at it, and then look at factors that influence exposure, likelihood, and severity or consequence. And so that's could be the intersection, right out the front of the office there. Could be one down at outside the cafe at Salamanca there that you like to get your coffee at, or it could be near your house, or it could even be one that you remember that you saw in another state or country when you went on holiday, and you can do that by a street view. I'm very relaxed on what it is, but it's more just putting into practice a bit of thinking about, okay, these different elements. And what I'm going to do now is take you through each of those to skill you up on a bit of how to think about each of those elements. Later on, maybe early next year, or if the world allows us, maybe late this year, I'm hoping to get there in person, and we'll go out and we'll do some safe system assessing, which is really putting this into practice in more detail. But for now, we're going to get you to do a little practice exercise on your own intersection. So let's take each of these one at a time. And first of all, talk about exposure. Now, exposure, if you remember, I talked about is the number of people, whatever mode they're using, exposed to a crash type. Okay, and so if we can stop them being exposed to the crash, we change the exposure. Now, that little picture there, which is a little bit hard to see, is actually a railway level crossing, and the crossing they decided had a level of risk which was unacceptable, and they blocked it off. So you probably can't quite see it, but there's a mound of dirt back there with on the other side's a no, road closed sign. Basically, they have eliminated exposure at that point, at that crossing point. There is no exposure to crashes because nobody is driving through there. Now, yes, of course, they will probably have to go somewhere else to cross the tracks, but maybe they can go under at different points. That is one way to alter the exposure, is to block things off. Now, Australia is just notorious for like free access to fast roads, essentially. We love to just have all of our side roads feeding out onto our arterial roads, our state roads, our main roads. So this free access, but what it is doing is leaving us with lots of exposure points to risk along our higher speed roads. And so what we like to do as a first thing within sort of safe system thinking around the management of the road network is try to look at, can we start to close off some of these in order to be able to leave us with one intersection, maybe with the higher speed, higher volume road that we can then address with some other measures to make it safe. It's just going to be so expensive and disrupt so much traffic if we just have, every couple of 100 meters, another intersection that we're trying to manage with the likelihood and the consequence. So we've just got this incredibly free access to the road network, and that's a planning, strategic level decision. It's very hard to convince people that they might have to drive another 100 meters the other way, where they used to be able to access straight out onto the road. But when we're trying to look at how do we manage risk, that's a pretty good way to do it. Another way to address exposure is to take a conflict, and a conflict by that I mean, say, cyclists and cars mixing together on high-speed roads, or on any roads really, and completely separate them and say, right, cyclists, there's your own road essentially, and cars theirs, and you don't mix. You are not exposed to each other in terms of being able to have a crash. So that full separation is a change in the exposure to crashes. And that's really, again, so well aligned with safe system principles if we want to keep travel speeds up for vehicles and when we have vulnerable road users. The idea of having a bike rider in a traffic lane or separated from a traffic lane with just a white line and a little bike symbol just doesn't align well with our safe system principles, because the speed of the vehicles is high enough to kill or seriously injure the cyclist. And we're relying on the humans not making mistakes, not sort of drifting out of their lane, being alert, being able to see the cyclist all the time. And we know that they're not going to do that all the time, and we will see that happen. But if we make this full separation, we're not sort of subject to that challenge. It's the same with pedestrians, obviously. Pedestrians we've done for a bit longer, a bit better, where we sort of know the idea of a footpath is a very good thing. But we have the other road user being a cyclist, which is essentially just as vulnerable as a pedestrian. The helmet helps a bit, but we've got that huge vulnerability. And we should be sort of thinking about that separation when we can. Next session, I'm going to talk a lot more about vulnerable road users, pedestrian cyclists and motorcyclists, because I think they certainly warrant their own full presentation and delving into that. And it's a growing area of concern in road safety. So let's now jump to likelihood of crash. So that's trying to address exposure. Now, how do we alter the likelihood? So these are things that we can put into the road and the road environment that help the human not crash. Okay, and this is actually one where we, as a profession, those of us who have been engineering the road environment, have got really good at it, and we've put a lot of effort into it over many years. We've really been going hard at this. And it's a wonderful combination of human factors and engineering and understanding vehicle characteristics as well. There's so much subtlety in the road environment as well that people will never sort of see and perceive. But there are sort of obvious things that you see, like the line marking, the signs, the sealed shoulders, the audio tactile edge line. So they're the things that people would often term a rumble strip on the side of the road. We call it audio tactile edge line. Technically, a rumble strip goes across the lane. So you may have driven over some rumble strips in your life. A rumble strip would be and an audio tactile edge line, but that's just sort of semantics. I mean, the the community thinks a rumble strip is anything that rumbles as they go over it. So we'll just be aware of that. But these are all trying to stop people crashing in the first place. Wake them up if they're not concentrating. We do this with subtleties which people probably not aware of, with things like the way you might enter into a roundabout, for example. And if you're on a high-speed road, and I'm sure you've done this, you might notice that you go into a roundabout and we give you a little chicane on the approach. Now, that's a subtle thing that we're doing to ensure that as you're coming in, you're waking up. We give you an active task to do before the point you need to start making really quick decisions. So you can sort of activate, a driver in a number of ways. A speed hump's another good one, or any raised thing in the road. It will activate the brain of a driver. They will wake up and they will start to do things. And that's really good, because people drive in all sorts of states of consciousness. Now, we would love them all to be alert, compliant, like you all are now. You've had your morning coffee, you're into it, you're awake, you're alert. Unfortunately, we have people doing, working the double shift, partying all night, jumping into their car, have had a massive fight with their partner getting into their car. To ask a driver to be in this perfect state of mind, it's not going to happen. And so anything we can do to bring them out of wherever they are and back to reality is a really exciting way to reduce the chance that they crash. And I'll talk to you a few more about a few things there. But another thing that sort of can reduce the chance that people crash are the traffic lights. Okay, so they do a pretty good job of telling people when to go, when to stop, and different ways that we can phase these and change them, and some exciting new stuff happening, like just a little one that actually, interestingly, we did this about 12, 15 years ago, and it sort of went quiet for a while, and then it sort of re-emerged, which we call hold the red. But basically what you do is, as vehicles are approaching, you have a radar that points at the vehicles, and you've got your traffic lights. So you've got red on the side road, and you've got green on the main road, and then the green goes to orange, and your radar is looking at the vehicles coming in and the speed that they're going. And if your radar says, hang on, this one ain't going to stop, we call it a rogue vehicle. We go, this one ain't going to stop. Instead of your signals going to green on the side road and letting a vehicle into the intersection, we just hold everything red for a while until the rogue vehicle goes through this all red intersection. We put a red light camera there as well. So, because we don't want to encourage this. But, those sort of tweaks on what we've got there are amazing ways to reduce the likelihood of crashes. Okay, so those things are good. And signals are really good at reducing the likelihood of crashes. But they really don't do anything for the severity of the crash. So if that car still comes into the intersection, or a car's in the intersection and a car runs a red light, we have this high severity crash still occurring. And so to address the severity of the crash, we only have sort of limited things in our toolkit, because this is back to physics, biomechanics and physics. Really what we have are a few things. We either need to give the human more ability to withstand force. Okay, so we could say only people with maybe between sort of 18 and 60 are allowed to be on our road network because they have a stronger stature. Now, of course, that's not going to be very acceptable, is it? But, we would then have more tolerance to the severity of crash because we're all built better to withstand that. Or we could make everybody wear protective clothing as they drive. or as they walk around. And so that would sort of absorb some of the energy, reduce the severity. Or we can look at the things that we can control within the operation of the vehicle, such as the speed that the vehicle's going, the angle that any conflict might happen at, or the features within the vehicle that may help to manage the energy. And so you can see there on the screen, one is slowing vehicles down at the point that they could crash, and we call that a conflict point. At a conflict point, if we could slow vehicles down where there's a higher likelihood that they're going to crash, then we're addressing the severity as well. Also, a barrier system. A barrier system is a wonderful severity device, because if you put a barrier system down your road, so take the Midland Highway, for example, lots of barrier going out there, you're actually going to get more crashes. You're increasing the likelihood of crashes, because all of a sudden now you've got something in the middle of the road and the side of the road that if you leave your lane, you're going to hit, right? Beforehand, if you left your lane and you drifted onto the other side of the road, there's a chance that there wasn't anybody coming. In fact, it happened quite a bit. There was nobody coming. You'd wake up, you'd go, whoa, I'm on the wrong side of the road. You'd get back on your side of the road. You'd go, oh my God, all right, I've got to take a break or something like this, right? Or you fell asleep, you drifted off and maybe overcorrected and shot over the other side of the road, through into the paddock and just went, oh my God, right? There's no crash there. But when we put the barrier in, you're going to hit a barrier, right? There will be more crashes. But the severity of crashes, so the ones where people weren't lucky and there was somebody coming the other direction, or there was a tree that they hit, or they rolled over in the roadside, the severity of those is so bad that now we reduce the severity so significantly because they hit the barrier and they run along the barrier and they dissipate their energy over time. The dissipation of energy over time is key, right? Abrupt dissipation of energy and the deceleration is where the damage happens in the human body. We just can't stop quickly. We're not designed for that. So what we need to do in trying to, get things as safe system aligned as possible is to see if we can do anything to reduce the exposure. Do everything we can to reduce the likelihood, but don't stop there. Say now, even though we've done all this awesome stuff to stop people crashing in the first place, there's still going to be crashes. How do we make sure those are within tolerable limits? So there are sort of elements to understand how we get good alignment with safe system principles. Anybody got any questions on that before I sort of hone in on intersections?
I have a question because I'm thinking about my intersection.
Good.
I'm pretty sure there's like a legal limit where you can have traffic signals in a row, isn't there? Like spacing. Is that right?
There's not legal limits. There's guidance on how close they should and shouldn't be. You don't want too many close together for a number of reasons. It's mainly driven through traffic efficiency, the amount of stops that somebody would have to go through. So your traffic operations area is probably driving a lot of that. From a road safety perspective, we don't like it for something we call a see-through effect. Because if you're approaching a set of traffic signals and there's another one very close, sometimes people will see, they'll see the one in the distance and they'll run straight through the one close to them without sort of perceiving that.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, proximity is an interesting one. So you're the one you're thinking about's got some close signals together?
It's got some close traffic signals, but one of the traffic signals is for a pedestrian crossing, not for traffic control of cars or anything, and then there's an intersection up the top that has cars coming through that is quite dangerous. And I think there should be lights there rather than down near the crossing. But
Okay.
anyway, I'll show you.
That sounds like a really good one for you to do a little bit of thinking about the severity and the likelihood, the exposure. So yeah, no, that'll be good. There was a while, there's this interesting sort of transition we had. So traffic lights, traffic signals, as we'd call them. You probably haven't looked at them in a lot of detail, but the lights used to be an incandescent globe, right? And they changed those over to LED globes, within the last sort of decade, and have been sort of progressively upgrading them as needed. But what we'd see in similar to your situation, Carly, is we would decide to put a new set of pedestrian operated signals at some point. Usually, you got a strip of shops, got a main intersection, and that's got traffic signals. That's had traffic signals for, forever, right? And we decided, we need a crossing point, down here, whatever it is, 100 meters or something like that. And so this brand new set of traffic lights would go in, and they'd have these beautiful LED lights, and they would be green a lot of the time because it was only when the pedestrian came to push it. But then the intersection just up the road had these dull red lights, right? And so as you would come up at night or in dusk, it was so bright, this green, right? And these very dull, in your foreground, these dull red lights. And we saw this sort of pattern of increased intersection crashes with these installation of the new pedestrian operated signals with LEDs. So this is where we sort of started implementing this regime of, if you're going to implement that, any intersection close by has to be upgraded to LEDs as well. So that sort of thinking. But yeah, no, it'll be very interesting. I'm looking forward to that that assignment.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Let's talk about intersections in a little bit more detail, and then I'm going to get you to do a bit of a thinking about a hypothetical intersection, or actually it is a real intersection, but you'll do a bit of thinking about it. So these are some high-level principles that Monash University Accident Research Centre came up with, and I think that they are really nice, just sort of thinking points around intersection. And interestingly, the first thing they say is, can you get fewer vehicles? They haven't even sort of jumped to intersection. But can we do things like mode shift? Can we get people onto safer transport modes? Can we reduce vehicles going through this intersection? And that's quite an interesting starting point. We often think about that from lots of other transport objectives, getting people into lower carbon modes and those sort of things, but fewer vehicles. Then into that fewer intersections we talked about. Now, both of these are addressing exposure. Then we go into sort of fewer conflict points, and conflict points, remember I used that term there, that's points where crashes can happen. And this is into the likelihood. And then we get into the severity. And we want to change speeds and angles to biomechanically tolerable levels. And we talked about that last session, where we were looking for that 90-degree crash, that right angle crash within that 50 km/h or below. If we can get a little bit more angle on that, we can go a little bit above 50. Now, I don't know if you remember year 11 vectors and your physics in year 11 or 10 or 12 or somewhere around there, but don't worry, I'm going to explain it very easily, hopefully. So vectors are this, and energy gets pushed out. So what happens there is, as you crash on an angle, right, you bounce off a bit, don't you? Okay, two vehicles coming in and crashing like that is much less severe to the occupants of the vehicles than crashing straight onto the side or head on. There's a lot of energy being pushed around and played there, but we do have those crumple zone airbags and all those other things. So this is actually a little bit of vectors, a little bit of physics. energy, we call it distributed into the environment, basically, is far greater on that angle crash than it is on that angle crash. And that's why we can go sort of another sort of 10 or so kilometers per hour up if you can get some angle on that crash. If we've got vulnerable road users involved, we're trying to look at that 30 kilometers per hour or below, ideally sort of 20 kilometers an hour or below, but 30 kilometers per hour or below. And if we can't meet these, we need to look to rearrange that intersection in some way. So we either remove that crash or we alter the way it all happens. So I just sort of put this there again because it's so important. Really sort of the vehicle to vehicle. This is passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle, car to car. We can pretty much do any crash at around 40 kilometers per hour and expect people in those vehicles to survive. And 50 gets to about our limit where we're onto that side impact direct strike. When we get more angle on it, either way, so more head on or more side swipe, we can get up to about the 60 kilometer per hour mark. The direct sort of head on rear end, we still talk about around the 70 kilometer per hour mark. And for up at around 80 kilometers per hour, we can't feasibly operate an intersection where we have that if it is a change in speed. And we would call this a delta V. So again, I'm just using some sort of physics language here. That is, delta is change in. So your little triangle sign, delta, change in velocity, change in speed. Now, I'll explain that because we can operate an intersection well above 80 kilometers per hour, as long as we get the vehicles to be going at similar speeds. And this is like an on-ramp, right? If you can operate an on-ramp and the intersection there very fast, 100, 110, 120 if you want, as long as you give the opportunity for one vehicle to get up to speed and the other vehicle, when it hits it, there is not a change, not a speed difference that is outside of our tolerable limits. So accelerating vehicles has this wonderful benefit from that exchange of energy perspective. Of course, if you want to operate an on-ramp at those speeds, you need to be aware that there will likely be conflict. And that's usually okay, that initial one, but where do they go after that? Do they go into the roadsides? What happens from there and how do you manage energy? But initial crashes were okay. So we often look at the angles that crashes could happen at an intersection and we often would draw diagrams. Here's a new intersection being planned. So we just quickly, angle it out and say, yeah, okay, that's going to be about 100. And, this is very precise, but you don't even need to be this precise. You can just go, yeah, okay, a vehicle coming out, one hitting it, that's about 90 degrees. As they turn, it's going to be a bit more shallow angle. And we can look back and we say, okay, 90, that's about a 90-degree crash, about a right angle. Okay, well, can we aim to get speeds of those bullet vehicles? Those bullet vehicles being the ones that are going to do the damage. Right? The ones coming out aren't bullet vehicles. They're target vehicles. They're the ones that are going to be struck because they're not going to have the speed because they're facing a T intersection. They're going to slow down. They're not going to. The bullet vehicles are just traveling along. What's their speed? Can we manage their speed to within around that 50 kilometers per hour mark? And, the other side of the road, we could probably get up to 60 kilometers an hour if we wanted because you're going to get more angle on that crash when it happens. The other thing we sort of need to think a little bit about are these secondary crashes that I alluded to. So we have immediate conflict happen between passenger vehicles, and then at an intersection, they will often go into a secondary crash. And this is some research that was done by the Centre for Automotive Safety Research in the University of Adelaide there, CASA, showing, vehicle, and you've got a vehicle and they come in and they meet at an intersection. So they sort of replotted all these crashes that had happened. And the secondary crash where death and serious injury occurs, fairly obviously out there. I don't know if they needed the research to tell us this. It's fairly obvious where they're going to go. Occasionally you get some clip off and people avoiding crashes and the like, but generally that's sort of where we're going. So we need to think about the rigidity, how harsh the roadside is around intersections as well. It's not just that crash between the vehicles. Anybody got any questions before I jump into a little exercise and make you do a little bit of pondering? Okay. So here is an intersection. And I'm going to talk you through it. Explain a little bit about what it is, show you some pictures of it. Your job is going to be to redesign this intersection and to eliminate death and serious injury into the future, or get us as close as we possibly can to elimination of death or serious injury into the future. Okay, you're going to get a certain amount of information and I'm going to be able to answer questions for you, but you're going to come up with ideas on how we do this. And I'm going to constrain you with a few little things. So this road is a major road, right? It's a major highway. It carries 20,000 vehicles a day. It carries trucks, buses, motorbikes, cars. So this is quite, and it's got a 70 km/h speed limit. This is a bus stop. This is a shared path, bikes and pedestrians. These are all houses, residential area. This thing here is a culvert, so it's a drain. It basically, the water goes under the road at this location, so it sort of flows in here and floods out into this area when it rains heavily. It's got 2 lanes in each direction, as you can see. It's got a right turn lane. It's got a little crossing in the middle of the road where people cross into the middle of the road. They walk along the median a bit and they cross. We call that a Danish offset crossing. Don't worry, it's just a term you won't need to remember that, but it's interesting because it's a Danish offset. This is a very little point, but it's a backwards Danish offset. They should have done it the other way around, because in a Danish offset crossing, what you do is you put the pedestrian into the middle of the road and you make them walk at traffic and then cross the road. And so this one, they put them into the middle of the road and they make them walk with their back to approaching traffic. So at either direction, you're crossing the road, you're not facing traffic. So we don't tend to like that. Interestingly, I don't know if you've ever walked through a railway level crossing. They do this. This is a human factors technique as well, where they make you walk down and then back, right? And often you think, why are they making me walk down here and then back there just to cross the line there? But what they've done is they forced you to look down the tracks that way and then look down the tracks that way, because you had to, because you had to zigzag back. And it's a similar theory with how we do this, trying to reduce the likelihood. They put this one in backwards for some reason, so we're losing that advantage. Anyway, that's a little aside. It's probably a minor thing in the scheme of things, but I thought you might find it interesting. These are service roads, and they're 2-way service roads. So that's basically so people can access their houses without having to access straight onto the main road. So we've done a little bit of good stuff there with access minimization, minimizing the exposure to those crashes. This is a side road. It has a 50 km/h speed limit, a 50, the default. Down here, about 300 meters, is a school. I think it's a primary and a secondary school. It's quite a big thing. It's got sports complexes as well. What else can I tell you about this? Let's just have a look at it from the street level. So there you go. You can see there, that's the side road there that we were talking about. There's that bus stop we were talking about. That shared path sort of came in from over here. You can see it's got lighting. It's got a few trees around. So there's lots of vehicles there. Let's have a look from the other direction. You can see there's that little Danish offset crossing I was talking about there, but there's the drain that goes underneath, the shared path comes in. Okay. So what as I mentioned, I'm going to ask you to do is change this intersection, change whatever you want, change the infrastructure, add things, change the way people operate there, do whatever you want. You're not constrained by anything except I'm going to give you a budget. It's the real world now. You've got a budget. I'm going to give you $3 million though. Now, you probably don't know what infrastructure costs. So I am your instant cost estimating service. So all you need to do is just ask, and I will instantly tell you how much what you're thinking about doing is going to cost. So you can either type it in, or you can just unmute yourself and say, Ken, how much to do a flyover, a grade separation? You know, that's so we build the road up, build a nice big bridge over the top, and I'll say it'll cost you $38 million because you're going to have to buy up a huge amount of houses and build this bridge, and it's a huge engineering task. So you won't be able to afford that with your $3 million. But you can do whatever you want, but I am going to put another constraint on you. We've done community consultation out here. We've talked to the residents, we've talked to the school, we've talked to the bus association, we've talked to lots of people. And I know you are going, the first thing I want to do is close this intersection off, because that's what we talked about with exposure. We floated that idea with them. And they started writing petitions and picketing. They did not like this idea that we would take away that access. So we're gonna step away from that one. So that's not on the table. You cannot stop people accessing into this road, and they have to be able to get in and out from each direction. Okay, so that's a bit of a constraint there. So that's the second constraint. And the third one is, you are operating in the current political and organizational environment that you're in. So if you propose something highly radical here, and I encourage that, I might ask you a little bit about how are you going to get that through the Department of State Growth system, and convince the traffic engineers and convince your minister and the local member and the community. Have you got any tricks, any ways that we might be able to get this one in? So, you know, if you say, well, it's 70 kilometers an hour, I'm going to make it 20 kilometers per hour through there. I'm going to say, okay, big speed reduction on our major arterial road, and it could be quite controversial, very controversial, I'd say. What's your plan? How are we going to get this? How are we going to get this through? So there are your three constraints. You got $3 million. You can't close the road, the intersection. You can't close the intersection. And you're in the current political and organizational context. So how much for a roundabout? What a lovely question. Okay, Austroads has some guidance on how big a roundabout should be at these locations. And in order to get a roundabout that meets the Austroads guidelines, it's going to cost you $7 million. I know, that's a lot, isn't it? And you might go, surely it can't cost that much. Well, it's a very big roundabout, because we've got to get the biggest vehicle, a B-double, which is a truck with a second cabin behind it, to be able to turn around this. And in order for that to happen, it needs a huge area. So we're actually sort of going to have to build this big roundabout. We're going to have to buy that house, all of those houses, those houses. We're going to have to do civil infrastructure to move our drainage. Then we got a relighting, and hey presto, we're at $7 million. And genuinely, I reckon that's about what it would cost at this location to get a roundabout in. I was doing a road safety audit of one recently in with farmland around it, and they just ticked over $6 million. So they weren't even able to acquire, residential houses. So roundabouts can be very expensive of that full size. Overpass.
So
yeah. Craig, yes.
Okay, so we're typing in our thoughts, or is this more of an open?
I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think, and then I will ask for volunteers to unmute themselves and tell me, and then I will pick some people to add or make comments. So don't think you can just hide behind the scenes there. You could be asked, and there is no right or wrong answer here. But what I do want you to do is think back to those principles that we talked about: exposure, likelihood, and severity. And I probably will ask you, when you come up with your idea, do you think it's going to change the exposure or the likelihood or the severity? So have a little think about that. So I will give a few minutes. You've got probably another 4 or 5 minutes here to think about it, and I'll just monitor and answer the dollar questions, but I will answer any questions that come up. So either unmute yourself or the like. But we've got a question: overpass or underpass for pedestrians and cyclists to replace the Danish offset crossing. So an overpass you can do for 1.5 million. And an underpass you can do for your full 3 million if you're building it from scratch, because there's a fair bit of work to be done there. If you use the drainage structure, which we might have a bit of a chat about, you can halve that. It's also going to be 1.5 million, and dug it out a bit further and stuff like that. So jot a few ideas down, either on a bit of paper or feel free to pop them in. Cost of traffic signals. So traffic signals are going to cost you $1.8 million. A short run merging lane. So I assume that's for people exiting. Are you talking about, who's that, Jordan? Are you talking about going that way or some down here, or both? You're on mute if you were talking.
I'm talking about turning right from the road with the keep clear section.
Yes. So coming out and going down this way? Going down the page? Yeah, okay. So let's call that $750,000 because we're going to have to do some slight widening to get it wide enough for the car, and then, yeah, some civil works.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll give you a couple more minutes to have a think about. You can alter anything you want in the road environment or the way it's operated or anything like that. One more minute to come up with your ideas. Okay, what's the cost to reduce the speed limit from 70 kilometers per hour to 50 kilometers per hour? I'm going to say $50,000, right? You might say, oh, that sounds like a lot. It's just changing some signs. There's generally quite a process to go through to change a speed limit, and there's always a little bit more packed into it. And there's some reports that need to be written. There's some database changes that need to happen. There's the actual signs and they need to get installed and a few other bits and pieces, but just $50,000. $30 more seconds, and we will start by asking for a volunteer, and then we'll go from there. What would be the cost to get electronic signs to reduce speed limit during school hours? Excellent question. So to do that on a dual lane road like this, it means we're going to have to use 4 signs because approaching, we like to put one in the median and one on the side, because in case you're driving along in the left-hand lane and there's a truck, or sorry, in the right-hand lane and there's a truck in the left-hand lane and it blocks your vision to that sign, we don't want you to miss it. So we'll put one in the median and one in the other, and we're going to go with $40,000 per sign. So what are we going to do? So 4, 8, 12, 16, $160,000. And because I like you can have it for $150,000. And we've got to connect that to the central system, and we've got to put the solar or connect it to the mains power, and we've got to power it up for the days, but that's all included in the price. Okay, to keep us moving along, I'm going to ask if there's a volunteer to tell us how they're going to transform this intersection. And if I don't get a volunteer, I'll pick somebody. So, any volunteers? Okay, Emily, is that you? Okay, you're going to unmute yourself there. Yes.
For the budget that we had, I thought an overpass for pedestrians and cyclists, and then Carly's idea of a traffic signal installation for vehicle traffic.
Okay.
I think that would be the full budget.
That would, you're pretty close to full budget.
That would be
there.
over.
Hopefully get a good price from contractors, and you can do it. Now tell me, which of these things of exposure and likelihood and severity are we addressing with these?
The overpass or underpass. I think overpass was cheaper, so we'll go with that. Would reduce exposure for vulnerable road users, basically
Yes.
eliminate exposure along that crossing. And the traffic signals would reduce likelihood.
Very good.
And severity, I guess, because it would slow traffic down as well.
So in some crashes, we would probably influence the severity where they, brake late and they slow down and then they crash. But we are left with a residual where they still will be very high speed and the like. So we tend to, I suppose, concentrate more on the potential for still those high speed ones. So we do we do just talk about the likelihood of crashes coming down the signals as you did there. You're right, though, in some instances and some crashes, we're going to see more minor events. But that's good, and it's good thinking the way you've done that. I think that the overpasses are one of those things where, in theory, you're right, it eliminates the exposure. In practice, we do get a lot of people who don't use it. And we need to always take the real use of a road network into account. So what we find with something like that is we get a good proportion use it, and it's often the school kids are actually, really good because they've been told they have to use it, and you work with that, and you get some old people who use it because really struggle. But we still get a lot of pedestrians, off the bus and they walk across. Intoxicated pedestrians really do not climb stuff; they will just walk where they want. And yeah, but you're right. You're absolutely right in that will reduce the exposure to crashes. There's going to be less pedestrians exposed to being struck. Great, excellent thinking. Would anybody like to add to that or alter that or do something different?
I'll alter it.
Okay.
Slightly. Because I was going to put in traffic signals, but also reduce the speed limit and put in school zone signs as well. So reduce it to 50 and put in school zone signs to 40.
Right. Fantastic. So
in budget, 2.45 mil.
we're going to have a good Christmas party this year, and with all that extra budget. So tell me, are you influencing exposure likelihood or severity with this speed reduction? Speed limit?
The speed severity.
Yes, severity, and you'll get likelihood benefit as well. So the reduction in speed, we know, lessens the chance a crash is going to happen and how bad it's going to be when it does happen. So lower speeds, less chance of crash, less severity of crash. So yeah, that's wonderful benefit. But Carly, tell me, the wonderful people of Tasmania have been driving this road for the last 70 years at 70 kilometres per hour. And now all of a sudden we're spending, what was it, 2.48 to do what now? To reduce the speed limit to 50?
Yeah.
This is going to impact freight. This is going to impact efficiency.
It's only going to add 8 seconds to your travel time.
Well, it's revenue raising, isn't it? I mean, you're just blatantly digging into the pockets here.
There's been
of hardworking Tasmanians
and this
in a pandemic.
This intersection.
Sorry, go.
No, I'm just saying you would use however many crashes and crash types that there have been at that intersection. You would talk about how much travel time is actually added, which is usually not much time. And then talk about the reduction in speed, how many lives that would save. I don't know, something like that. Yeah,
good. Some really good things to latch onto there. But it is the reality of what happens when we try to do that speed limit. I mean, and I was being nice there in my rant. The knives come out from the community. They're very angry at these things. And so everything you've said from a road safety perspective is absolutely true. You will get those benefits. You will have wonderfully better alignment with safe system principles. And I think a few of the things you've latched onto are really good. The one that I loved that you latched onto was popping school signs up there.
Yeah.
Because there's your comms and engagement go-to. Well,
take care of our children.
Yeah, the children. Think of the children.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Now when the person gets really angry, they're the person who doesn't care about the safety of children, and that is not a good community position to be in. So nice, crafty use of the school in the proximity. So that was good.
That was Tom's suggestion first.
All right, Tom can have credit for that. Tom, anything else that you want to add to Carly's idea there, or anything different? Oh, you're still on mute there, Tom. Well, you're going to type it in. That's fine. Are you in the same room as Carly? No. Microphone isn't working. Oh, good. Okay. So we'll say that you're happy with Carly's suggestion and you're taking credit for the good parts. It was great. Good. Okay. Newton, do you have anything different? Did you think of something else, or are you happy with what they're saying?
No, I like Carly's suggestion. I would have probably gone for 60 Ks, not 50, but yeah, other than that, that was basically what I had written down as well.
Okay. Carly, why did you go for 50?
So that it lessened the severity if there was an accident, because there's pedestrians and cyclists in the vicinity. I know that should be 30, but no one's going to go 30 kilometres.
Okay, so you're finding a balance there.
Yeah.
You wanted 30, you thought that came in the middle. Newton was a bit more conservative, said, "Oh, we'll just start inching it down." Okay.
And there's houses in the area as well, so.
Right. Yes.
Children around, but anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Sally, anything to add? No. You happy with the expenditure? Happy with everybody's ideas? Okay, Jordan.
She has my approval to go ahead, unimpeded.
Stamped, approved by Jordan. Budget allocated. Craig, anything to round it out?
No, I think that all those are pretty good. Perhaps I would, a couple of options. I'd probably go the variable speed, electronic variable speed limits, bring it down to 40 during school hours or daytime hours, and have integrated speed cameras or something in there, fixed speed cameras both directions to catch those, or to encourage compliance with the variable speed limits. I've tried on about the no turn right out of your side road. Perhaps I think that's a bit of a risk for your pedestrians crossing down, looking up the road to trading on that. Tidy up that pedestrian crossing, and perhaps an expensive option would be one of your fancy platform treatments for the whole intersection. Okay,
a platform treatment for the whole intersection. Okay, that's interesting. We'll explore that. Interesting stuff. Well, first of all, I think the way you're thinking about it's really, really good across the board here. You're thinking about, okay, can we change the exposure? So separate, remove this conflict point one way or another. Can we address the likelihood by warning people, by slowing people down, by giving them controls like traffic lights? Can we influence the severity by altering the speed through speed limits or one way or another? I'm just going to use this to sort of leverage along for the learning now. And I'm going to go through each of those in a little bit of detail. But the first thing I'd say is that I didn't specify that it had to be infrastructure only that you did here, but you sort of, maybe I sort of guided you down that way to build something. But I really do always encourage people to think broadly to start with, at least. So yes, let's alter the infrastructure, let's improve things like that. But can we do other things? Could we have done work with the school? Could we have done comms and engagement campaigns with the people there? Could we do different, advertising? It is a whole system we're working with. But I did sort of slightly hint that we were in the infrastructure space. But what you've come up with for infrastructure is really good. But let me talk about a few things, and I'll come back to this intersection later. But the idea of traffic signals came up, and the idea of roundabout came up early on, and then we decided that was too expensive. But traffic signals came up, and we know that traffic signals, and I've got the little reminder here, that they are a likelihood, right? And they do a good job. And we know that probably at an intersection like that, we will reduce the fatal and serious injury crashes by about 45% with the installation of traffic signals. Right, but that leaves 55% still happening, doesn't it? So that's not good. We don't want that. And I did this little heat map, and this is just using publicly available data for death and serious injury. I've done it for outer metropolitan Melbourne, but you can do it for outer metropolitan Hobart or Lonnie or Burnie or, you know, anywhere where the speeds are a bit higher and you've got traffic signals. Each of those hotspots, and hotspots there are death and serious injury, right? So these are where people have been killed and seriously injured, and the bigger the spot, the more people are being killed and seriously injured there. Every one of these is a signalized intersection. And it's quite interesting because we think of traffic signals as sort of this ultimate form of intersection treatment before you can actually do a grade separation, a flyover, an overpass, right? So we get to that point. And then we sort of go, well, if they can't stop when it's a red light, come on, it's on them. Like, yeah. But the reality is that our safe system says, no, we need to be saying, we've got to do something about this. And there is a certain stupidity in us continuing to build signalized intersections in high-speed areas and somehow expecting that they're going to perform and people aren't going to run the red light and aren't going to have crashes and be killed and seriously injured. We know it's going to happen. So this is quite an interesting change. And I spend a lot of my time now in robust discussions with traffic operations engineers because they love a set of traffic signals because it gives them more control over the network. They can, you know, turn this one on and move this one around and get nice, tweak their pattern of flow and how things move. But we've got this residual death and serious injury that we need to start acknowledging and addressing. The roundabout. Now, this is an interesting one, isn't it? The roundabout addresses the severity of the crash. Okay, now we're into something. Now, why does it address the severity of the crash? I'm going to come back to that shortly. Roundabouts don't need to be that big. I sort of gave you a little bit of a, I said, well, if we're going to follow Austroads, it's going to have to be big. And yes, Austroads does that, but we can have small roundabouts, very small roundabouts. Obviously, a very different road environment here. But you can have small ones. You can have ones like this that you don't even actually have a roundabout and you've just got painted roundabout. I mean, it is a roundabout, but you could just drive straight over that if you're in a large vehicle. And, you know, sometimes we put ramps on the approach to slow people down at the roundabout and those sort of things. But why are roundabouts better? Why do we see actually about around 80% reduction in death and serious injury if we had put a roundabout at that location, whereas the signals, we were only getting 45%. Roundabouts are hugely superior in terms of their safety for passenger vehicles, right? This is a conflict point analysis, a very simple conflict point analysis. Each dot there is a way that that a driver, and this is just for vehicle to vehicle, driver can be killed or seriously injured. Or they can crash. I mean, the red ones are the crossing ones, which are worse. But you see there, just the sheer number of ways that you can crash at a roundabout is far less compared to traffic signals. So that's one big advantage. The second one is the angle that we crash at. And remember, I talked to you a little bit there about your vectors and the energy. We're getting the angle now. So that's a much better one at a roundabout. And this one sort of intertwines two things. One is speed. And the second, with the yawning person, is that amazingly, when you put a roundabout into an intersection, people approaching it in their completely phased out state of mind, they come back to reality. They look around. They slow down. It's like we bring them back from wherever they are and they're present. And they then are looking around and they slow down, and they have to slow down to navigate the roundabout. So, you know, this is just a wonderful win. Unfortunately, with a set of traffic signals, we have a bit less of that. There is a tendency for some people to just drive straight through a red light. They just miss it. They just drive straight through it at the speed they were going. And sometimes they even accelerate through it because they are catching the end of it, or, you know, in the rut, and then off they go. So a roundabout is just this wonderfully superior intersection treatment from a passenger vehicle perspective. We'll talk about cyclists and pedestrians and how to make roundabouts safer for them in the next session. But roundabouts are really wonderful. Any questions or comments at this stage? Okay, so I'm not going to spend long on this because this is just more out of interest, but not all roundabouts perform as well as each other. And we know that, I won't go into detail, if we have 2-lane roundabouts or 3-lane roundabouts, we sort of start to lose their safety performance. They're still better than traffic signals, but we're getting closer to the performance of traffic signals. So sometimes we like to put signals around a roundabout. What's the roundabout in Hobart there on the way in, just, you know, over the bridge and down, and it's signalised roundabout, isn't it? It's a good one. Does it have a name?
The railway roundabout?
Railway roundabout, that's it, yes. So, you know, we can signalise roundabouts and we slow people down and we get better performance. But the multiple lanes, it starts to get a little bit more challenging, and you have a few different trouble. I just thought I'd just show you out of interest. You may not have ever seen this. This is what we call a turbo roundabout. It's actually got separated lanes within a roundabout. The approach and through the roundabout, you separate out the lane. So you want to do a right turn, you get into the right lane and you go into this separated area and you continue around and out. It's quite sort of new stuff. We've got a few of them now in Australia. They're a bit rare in Australia. I love this photo because, you know, you've got a nice turbo roundabout, and look here, you've got a truck that's obviously come out. You've got a car going in there, and we go, you know, what I'm seeing here is low speed. I'm sure it will be low speed, right? And angle is just beautiful. So if that car does hit that truck, I think a nice angle, we're going to have a you know, bounce off, right? It's just good from a safety perspective. And it's just, you know, of course, people are making mistakes that come out when they shouldn't. But if this was a set of traffic signals, we'd have the same sort of mistake making. It would have been high speed, and it would have been, you know, potentially death and serious injury. But it's all happening now slow and at good angles. And this one, this is a slightly different story. I put this in here because we had a Dutch engineer who was over here talking to us about actually cyclists roundabouts. And I showed this Dutch engineer this picture because it's in the Netherlands, and said, yeah, this is just fascinating to me, because in Australia, when we get, you know, these large arterial roads, we're either going to do a big grade separation, so flyover or the like, or we're going to have that as a big signalised intersection because, you know, this is just too much. And in very typical sort of Dutch fashion, it says, but what about all the death and serious injury to your community that will happen? Oh yeah, I know. I'm like, yeah, but he could not fathom that you would possibly make this a signalised intersection with those speeds that would be going through there. And they would rather, you know, do something elaborate like this to slow everybody down. It's signalised as well. But, you know, very interesting sort of approaches that just could not fathom that. And we then start to get interesting ideas that are signalised intersections. But why do we do signalised? Sorry, this is a mock-up. This hasn't been built. But the reason people are coming up with these ideas and these mock-ups, because there's an existing signalised intersection, and they're saying, how do we slow vehicles down and improve the angles, but still get this capacity? How do we still make the traffic operations engineer happy enough that we're still going to pump as much traffic as you need through this, and you can still control things with your signals? And so they're trying to make this the idea that, you know, a vehicle approaching here will switch back on. They'll wake up because there's physical stuff there. They'll improve their angle a bit. So if we have crashes, they're going to be better. They're going to be slower. They're going to be something better. So lots of exciting sort of concepts coming up. And they're all around us now starting to say, how do we reduce the severity of crashes if people are going to make mistakes at these signalised intersections? And Craig made an interesting point about sort of, could we do something raised? Could we do a raised intersection? Could we do a raised platform, a raised sort of something there? Is that another way to slow people down through this intersection? And that will address the severity of the crash. The signals themselves are going to reduce the likelihood, but now we're looking at the severity as well. And that's what they proposed at that intersection you were looking at. So they did actually, I mean, for a group who aren't sort of career traffic engineers, you did a pretty good job of immediately sort of whittling down some of the options, and you said signals, probably, probably, you know, took the region about sort of 4 months worth of options analysis, multi-criteria assessments, and SIDRA analysis, traffic modelling and the like to also arrive at what you came up with in 4 minutes. So well done to you. Traffic signals were their preferred option. But what they said is, we're not comfortable leaving them as just our usual traffic signals. We've got traffic signals down the road, we've got traffic signals there, and then we've had our community killed and seriously injured at those. And then we know that's going to happen. If we build it, we'll reduce the risk here a bit, but we're still going to have this residual risk. What can we do? And they said, we want to slow vehicles down. And they did thinking the same way you did, in the sense that they went, well, let's reduce the speed limit. And then there was discussion, and they said, oh, that's going to cause us trouble because we have to deal with the community and the politicians, and, you know, speed limit changes. It's very challenging. How do we reduce speed without changing the speed limit? Then became the conversation, because it's much easier if the driver themselves decides to slow down rather than us putting a red circle around a black number, because they see that as a impingement on their freedom. But if we just say, hey, we suggest you slow down because you're going to damage your car if you don't, or the road environment's changing, they're okay with that. Right? Generally, sometimes a few people. I found this just fascinating. I was managing the road network in Eastern Victoria, and we had this long stretch of road, and it had 2 intersections, really high risk intersections, really bad. It's 100 km/h road environment, bad intersections. And we said, you know, we did our analysis. We said we want to put roundabouts at these intersections, and so we started the planning work for roundabouts, and then we went, oh, God, this is going to take us like 5 years to get roundabouts in, because we've got to do all the planning and design, and then you got to get funding, and it's just, you know, it's a long task. So we said we'll reduce the speed limit around these intersections in the interim for risk management. So we put the speed limits down to 80, which is still high, but it was, you know, reducing the speed a bit. And the community went berserk. It was, you know, revenue raising and local member, and and you know, I had the town hall meeting and talking to some of the really angry community. We said, well, we're aiming at roundabouts. We're managing risk in the interim. And they were just, roundabouts, that's what we need. Get those roundabouts in. You got to get that. That's the right intersection. And it just sort of dawned on us, or me, especially, I was like, these people are crazy, because when that roundabout's in, you know, they're going to have to go through there at about 50 kilometres an hour. It's going to be more impact on them. But they just see that as their choice to slow down rather than us mandating it on them. So if you're able to utilize infrastructure to get your speeds, it's sort of better. So then they built that, and there it is there. And you can see there the 50 km/h advisory speed. That's the one, hey, that's what we suggest you do. You don't have to. We're not going to fine you if you don't, but there it is. Another 50 there, and lots of advanced warning, you know, telling them go 50, speed hump, raised platform coming up. I I should have said speed hump. In fact, that's one thing I always point out is this is not like your local urban street speed hump. This is a more gentle platform, right? We're trying to get vehicle speeds to around the 50 on this one. And we can just tweak the angle of the ramp to get different speeds that we want. And the reason they chose 50, and you have a think about 50, 50 is that right angle car impact threshold speed. So if a car comes out of here and is struck by a vehicle here, well, let's bring it into 50, and it's that tolerable sort of speed. Now, you're right to point out pedestrians and cyclists, they're not going to get the benefit of that. There was a lot of analysis done onto which are, you know, riskiest road user. I didn't give you all the volumes and things like that, but that's the one that they were targeting. And I love, this is just a beautiful picture. Cars braking on the approach to a green light. And like people sometimes go, oh, that's just inefficient. I'm like, well, at a roundabout, we've got no problem with braking and slowing down and then accelerating up, do we? We just have never had to do that at a signalised intersection. But it's wonderful. So these are really exciting, and we're absolutely loving them. There's another thing in road safety, and we call it the dilemma zone. And then I guarantee you've been in the dilemma zone if you're a driver. The dilemma zone is a point in time and space when you are in a dilemma as to whether to put your foot down and go through the traffic signals or brake and stop because they've gone orange. Its official term is the dilemma zone. It's a lovely name, whoever named it. But what we find is that the dilemma zone significantly reduces with a raised platform because people just decide to stop. It pretty much makes your decision for you. It goes orange, I'm going to stop, because if I put the foot down, it's going to damage my car and I'm going to jump up. And now we're seeing sort of raised safety platforms being deployed widely at large signalised intersection in Victoria, especially, and New Zealand. Tassie hasn't quite got on board yet, but I'm excited for it to happen. Any questions on that? Okay, so it's one way to manage energy, manage severity of crashes. And I use it as an example because it's quite vivid. It talks you through that severity and changing people's behaviour without, you know, necessarily doing things that are going to be too politically controversial. Yeah, they're proving to be a really good treatment. There's some great research around them, and I'm hoping to see them very widespread across the country. And really, you know, the running of red lights, we don't want it to happen, but it just continues to happen. You can put up red light cameras, you can put up mast arms, you can put LEDs, do good line marking, people still run the red light. There are a few less that run the red light, but this still happens. I'm not going to talk to you long about this one either, but essentially, we talked about roundabouts, and it's really, I suppose, important to try to continue to look at how do we get roundabouts in if we possibly can. Now, this one's more of your sort of traffic engineer, road design, highway design engineers sort of, they really get excited about this one. But essentially, it's a smaller roundabout than it should be, much smaller, okay? So the roundabout really should be sort of this big, and then you'd have these reverse curves in. So you'd be acquiring, you know, big bits of land and lots. You'd probably have to buy this house out and the like. But they've gone and they're starting to say, how do we get a similar thing where people are approaching this intersection? They don't believe they have ultimate priority. They wake up, they slow down, anyway, they built this what is called a compact roundabout. And it's a little bit of drone footage for you. You can see it's actually a very small roundabout in the middle. Very small, little, tiny roundabout in the middle there. And then it's got what we call a concrete apron. It's actually a big concrete area that trucks can drive over. So that reduces our need for that massive roundabout for them to go around, because they can track over that. So we talk about a swept path of a vehicle. Basically, if you ever get to watch a truck turn a corner, a big truck turn a corner, you see how wide they need to go and they sweep around. It's called their swept path. And so we're trying to cater for that in different mechanisms. I mean, the traditional way is to make your roundabout massive. But these are pretty exciting techniques to try to reduce the cost, right? This one was done for about 3 million, right? Still expensive, but when we're talking about sort of usually 7 million or so for something like that, we're getting some good savings. Questions, comments at this stage?
I need to go to the bathroom.
Okay, let's have a short break. Actually, I sort of skipped the break. I usually give you the break when you're doing your exercise. So we'll take a short break, and then I'll whip through a few things at the end and then tell you your assignment. So let's take a few minutes now, and then I'll ease back into it. All right, we'll get back into it as others join in. A few more things I want to cover, and then just give you that assignment. Now, I've sort of, we're not going into the depths of the engineering details of things. I think you've sort of gathering this concept of exposure and likelihood and severity, and us trying to alter that and trying to integrate our system together with lots of different elements. Lane departure. Let's talk about lane departure crashes, so mid-block style crashes. Here's a road. You don't know which road it is. It's high speed road. It's 100 kilometers an hour. It's got shoulders, some sealed shoulders. It's got a center line. It's got one lane in each direction. Let's see there. It's without sort of knowing anything about this, what types of crashes do you think we would be having on this road? Just type a few ideas into the chat there. There you go. Okay. Yep. Done beautifully. Head on, run off road, running into trees, running into other vehicles. All right. We know it. It's not like it needs massive research reports or anything like that to know that roads like this are going to have a lot of death and serious injury from people leaving the road, hitting trees, hitting culverts, rolling over, or hitting other vehicles. Know that side impact into a pole or a tree is highly severe. So there's the ANCAP 29 kilometre per hour test. It's gone up to 32 kilometres per hour, as I think I mentioned to you. It is not fast. The side of a vehicle striking a tree is horrendously violent an event. And our cars are not designed for it. This has been estimated from the sort of video frames and that sort of stuff as a 60 kilometre per hour crash. Now, yeah, this is sort of showing the violence. So you can see the energy dissipated, and that's estimated at about the 60 kilometre per hour mark. So we know that when we've got roads operating at sort of 100 kilometres per hour and we have people falling asleep and leaving the road, what tends to happen is it's not this sort of clean, clear drift off into a tree. The mechanics of a run-off road crash or a head-on crash most often is driver falls asleep. They drift off the road because we usually make our roads sort of camber out a bit so the water drains off the road. So they drift off the road and they wake up and they're off the road because it's sort of, and they panic, as you would if you're off the road traveling at 100, 110 kilometers an hour. And their first instinct is to pull the wheel back and get back on the road. And what that does is it starts the vehicle yawing, and yawing is the sliding. And then they go into this sliding motion. And so what we're actually doing is exposing the side of the vehicle to trees, to power poles, and the vehicle to a rollover mechanism. Sometimes they do that, yank of the wheel back, and they fling straight over the road. Okay, so we get run off road to the right. Even though they drifted off to the left, they run off road to the right. Sometimes they head on crash as they come over. So it's actually quite a chaotic scenario. Often people just imagine it as a driver's asleep, they drift off, they hit a tree. No, it's out of control. And so that's why the side of the vehicle becomes so interestingly important. So the past technique used to be to create this thing called a clear zone, right? And a clear zone used to be an area from the edge line where you clear all of your trees and power poles and anything fixed. And we used to calculate clear zones. And for high speed roads, it was like 9 meters from the edge line, maybe 10 or 12, depending on whether it was on a curve or not. And the thing is that back in the day, that was probably the best we could do. Nowadays, we have amazing barrier systems that actually perform better than clearing those trees. So hitting the barrier, if the barrier is about 4 meters from the edge line, is far safer than taking your luck in this cleared area, because odds on the vehicle is going to go either, well, vehicles will likely go, some vehicles will go further than that. Some vehicles will still shoot back onto the other side of the road. And some vehicles are going to roll over. As they try and get back on the road, they start sliding, the soil catches on their tyre and they'll start rolling. So what we know is that clearing the roadside helps, but it doesn't eliminate death and serious injury. It doesn't even get us anywhere near, well, not as close as putting a continuous barrier system in. The other thing is that we are not in the space of chopping down trees anymore, right? That's not, that's not what we want to do. And so we can get a safer outcome. We can save more trees by just putting continuous barrier systems down, and we can save lots of lives. So clear zones have been an absolute institution since about the 1960s in the management of a road and roadside. So another one where your institutional traffic engineers and road designers will just be, clear zone is what they've always done. And so to tell them we're not doing clear zones anymore because that's not the best thing we can do, they get angry. But they're not necessarily a safe place to be. And they're not going to give us the highest alignment with safe system principles, but they do provide some advantage. But the reality is we pretty much can't do them anyway. So roadsides like this are kind of a thing of the past, which is, this is probably what, they would have built the Midland Highway to if we hadn't sort of progressed our thinking around continuous barrier systems and the like, which is basically you just duplicate the thing, you clear some trees, you clear your trees out to, to 9 meters or 12 meters. You provide this big wide median. You probably wouldn't have that there and that there, but you provide this big wide median and this area to recover. It's all good except for the sort of 15 to 20% that don't recover. That they go all the way across, they hit vehicles coming, they go into those trees, they go into those trees. And we have just been for 50 years building these road environments, which are better, don't get me wrong. It's far better than a 1 lane in each direction or 2 lanes in each direction with a separated centre line, but it's not. But we can do much better with these narrower cross sections, less land, less trees chopped down, and these continuous barrier systems. And that's part of Austroad's new guidance in part 6. But really, like what we aspire to are these barriers each side. I mean, people sort of call it the bumper bowling of roads. Like, we're not letting you fall asleep, we'll catch you. We don't want you to fall asleep. We're going to try and stop that, but hey, like we'll catch you. And it doesn't matter, like if you've dropped your coffee in your lap, you're falling asleep, whatever it is, you have a seizure. The road is trying to just protect there. So it sort of goes down in safe system alignment from there. I'm not going to go into the detail, but lots of different cross sections. You know how your fridge has a star rating, an energy star rating? Yeah, we do that for roads too. There's an international system for star rating the safety of roads. It's IRAP, it's called IRAP, International Road Assessment Program. OSRAP is what we do. We do a lot of that sort of official star rating. We're accredited a star rate. This road cross section, you can't quite see it, it gets 4 stars, right? That's not bad. Like it's good. It's far better than the 1-star roads, which, like that picture of the one I showed you with the trees and the separate, that's a 1-star road basically. This is about a 4-star road for a whole lot of different different regions, cleared areas and all of this. But this is a 5-star road, and it's got the barrier, the barrier, and the barrier. And that's basically what takes it from 4 to 5. So yeah. So that's our sort of ultimate style cross section. But we've got to think about how we roll it out, the community interface with some of these things. I'm sure you'll get kickback from the Midland Highway and other jobs where you roll out this barrier. The motorcyclists get angry. The you know, sometimes you've got barrier too close to the road. They feel they can't pull over if they break down. We need to get better at this as engineers, and I think some of your roles are going to be in a good spot to help us out here, because a lot of engineers just look at the data and we're like, yeah, I mean, actually this scenario is extremely safe, but the community doesn't see it that way. They get very angry at this. The reason it's very safe is the biggest risk on this road before those barriers went in was leaving the road hitting trees, or hitting at a very low volume road, this one. So head-on crashes were kind of unlikely because there wasn't likely to be another vehicle coming. Hitting those trees was the biggest risk. Putting this in there, yes, there's an increase in risk in breaking down, or having the kid in the back throws up or something, and you got to you pull over in this, that a car will run into the back of you. But it's very low. It's actually quite low risk from just a pure data perspective. But gee, the community went feral. Like they absolutely so we redesigned the road. So thinking through and talking to the community and doing what we call context sensitive design, I think, is an area where your road design engineers, your engineers in departments, they need help in this stuff. But anyway, I won't talk much more about it. I'll finish with this example of energy management in a really good way. And then I'll give you your assignment. But this is an incident that happened in Mildura, so regional Victoria. Happened about 2:30 in the morning, and it was in an old Ford, 4 young male passengers. I think you get the picture of the behavioural challenges there. And they went through a roundabout. So even though the roundabouts do a wonderful job, in the majority of cases, this one they were, I would say, intentionally going through fast. One of the advantages, I think, that if there was a vehicle coming up from the other way, they would have slowed down and stopped, and there would have unlikely to be a collision. Anyway, they went through, they lost control, they hit a power pole. A very old vehicle, a 1-star safety rated vehicle these days. And they hit it at a predicted 90 kilometers per hour based on the forensic crash investigation. The power pole had what we call a raptor cushion around it. So raptor cushion is a something, so it's kind of got like a honeycomb center. It crushes a bit, but that's not its biggest genius energy management technique. When this is struck, it rotates, all right? So the angle of the front and everything. So as the vehicle hits it, it kind of moves the vehicle along, right? As opposed to them hitting that vehicle like that horrendous video we saw where it was bang. They hit it and it rolls them away from the pole. And it's a wonderful energy management technique. I think it's what they say in martial arts is to deflect the energy of the punch. I've never done martial arts in my life, but I watched the Karate Kid. There's it's this, the idea is just to roll the energy along and get it dissipating. And I just think this to me says that we have this wonderful innovation. If people can get their head around the concept of let's manage energy and dissipate it, people will come. Engineers just love solving problems. So as long as we frame these problems right, they will come up with these amazing things. And this is really cool. So all those 4 passengers all survived. There were some minor injuries. They are leading a normal, healthy life because they had that energy management. I mean, the pole came down as well, but it rotated. And but if that wasn't there, like all the reports on this just say they would definitely be, some of them killed. and holding these very severe injuries. So I think nice example to end on, but really to me, the biggest change in the management of the road system is an enhanced focus on the severity of crashes. Okay, any questions before I tell you what to do with your assignment? No? Okay. That's good. Well, you've done very well there. Let's I'll just share my screen again. Okay, so in Moodle, now I think you're all in Moodle, you've had success there. If you haven't, shoot an email back to Emma or Kathy or whoever sent you the email to say you're struggling to get into Moodle or you haven't received the link or the like, but I think most of you are in. So you've got some resources, which I think you've seen, reference documents and the like. So that was module. So we've just finished module 2. So you've got a quiz for this one, just the same as the other. And you can have 3 attempts at it, of course. But you've got this assignment. Now, the assignments it should be quick, and I've given you a little insight into what you'll be doing. But the assignment is a Word document for you to fill out. And so you download the Word document, and hopefully you're seeing it on screen now. I will, if you're not seeing it on screen, let me know, but I'll assume you are. So you've got instructions at the top there in case you forget, but anything highlighted in yellow, basically you're gonna update. Put your name in. Now, this is where you put a link to the intersection. So either a street view link or just write the intersection, you know, corner of Smith and John Street in Hobart, or, you know, wherever it is. Or put the coordinates or something. The reason for that is I would just want to jump into your intersection and have a look on Street View. You don't, you know, I don't need you to go out there and take photos or anything like that. This is just this is a quick one. But then it's filling out this table is what you're going to do. Factors that increase exposure. And really, you can have between 1 and 3 factors. Now, remember, I was talking about exposure. It's just the number of vehicles, the number of people, the number of like. So you might say, well, there's a school and the bus stop is on the other side of the road. So that, that's making pedestrians cross there. Or you may say, it's got 4 legs and 2 of them are high volume roads. That's the number of vehicles. That's the exposure. You could say it's a major cycle route. That's where everybody cycles from the university into the CBD or the like. So what's influencing the numbers? Then you're going to look at the likelihood, and you're going to look for, again, 1 to 3 things that are increasing the likelihood that people might crash there. Now that could be as we were talking about there, Callie was mentioning, that could be so you weren't talking about a see-through effect, I don't think, but it could be a see-through effect, could be faded signs, it could be unclear, it could be confusing. It could be the fact that you have to turn over like 2 lanes of traffic to do your right turn. It could be that there's something distracting in the distance. It could be. So I want you to just do a little bit of thinking and looking at this intersection and say, what could influence the chance people are going to crash? And then I want you to think about how bad is that going to be? And remember, what are things that influence how bad it's going to be? Well, this is really going to be around the speeds, the angles, the vulnerability of road users that are there. So, if it's pedestrians, you say, well, pedestrians are more vulnerable and the speeds of this and those sorts of things. The likelihood could even be more behavioural factors. You could say there's a nightclub on the corner and has intoxicated pedestrians on Thursday and Friday and Saturday night, so they're more likely to be staggering out onto the road or whatever it is, or it could be kids, or it It could be any sort of things that make that area more chance of a crash. And then you're thinking about how bad that crash will be. Then you come through, and I just want one thing, only one thing that you could change. So a bit like that little exercise we did with the intersection we had. Just what's one thing we could change? And this time you've got no budget limitations. You've got, basically the purpose of the assignment is proof that you understand what factors influence exposure, what factors influence likelihood, and what influence severity. So you can say whatever you want that would alter the exposure, the likelihood, and the severity. You know, you might say, close this road for exposure. You might say add street lighting for likelihood. You might say lower the speed limit or do a raised platform or something for the severity, whatever it is. So do it for an intersection. And then I think you've got a bit of time to do that. Basically, if you've done it by the start of next session, that would be good, and we can have a chat about anybody who has any questions on it or found interesting things. We can even Street View jump into one and have a look at it and the like. If you really can't get to it before then, it's okay. Basically, in order to complete this course and get your certificate, it has to be completed with those quizzes. Any questions on the task? All right. Sounds like you're all happy. You know where to find it. You'll do your quiz. And yeah, thanks for your input today. Well done. And I hope you had a bit of fun thinking like an engineer for a little bit there. I'll see you next week, and yeah, log in a couple of minutes early again, and I'll ask another trivia question or two maybe.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks everyone. Have a good day. Bye.